The Elder Scrolls V is a game set to the backdrop of the return of the dragons. Your character, whoever they might be, is sent to be executed, mixed up, one way or another, in the clashing armies of the civil war dividing the people of Skyrim. As you approach the executioner and lay down your neck for your inevitable end, a black dragon crashes down onto the tower above you, and chaos erupts, setting you free and beginning the tale of your destiny. But just what in Oblivion is really going on? To understand the events of the present, we must first return to the past. The origins of the dragons has long been a source of debate. As seen in A Pocket Guide to the Empire Volume 3, the land of Akavir translates to Dragonland, and the book also refers to the dragons as native. However, the stories of Torhal Bjork paint a picture of dragons native to the land of Atmora. These same texts also depict the idea of the dragons being direct creations of Akatosh. That claim is, of course, well backed. Akatosh is known as the dragon god of time, and dragons themselves appear to be immune to the effects of it, as well as referring to themselves as children of Akatosh. Either way, dragons were said to have existed since before the inception of time itself, which you could argue is somewhat contradictory to this claim. Despite this, dragons appear to have something of a hierarchical structure largely based on the age of the dragon. Typically, it would seem that the more ancient a dragon is, the more powerful it is. We see this within game itself, with ancient and elder dragons being more powerful than regular dragons. However, in theory, if a younger dragon were to defeat an elder and absorb their soul, an ability exclusive to dragons and the Dragonborn, the power gained would put them above their peers. Because, of course, dragons would do battle with one another, competing to see who was the strongest. Dragons by nature are prideful and loath to refuse a challenge. It is this very principle that allows us to capture Odahviing in Dragon's Reach. We also learn from Paarthurnax that all dragons feel the will to dominate, to rule over others, an urge that is almost impossible to ignore. Yet, despite this, and despite the cold, logical intelligence shown by many dragons, they are also susceptible to feelings of loneliness and even madness, much to the glee of Sheogorath, I would assume. We learn this once again from Paarthurnax as he talks about his journeys to visit Numenex, a dragon imprisoned in Dragon's Reach during the reign of Olaf One-Eye, and whose skull can be seen to this day above the Jarl's throne. But of course the dragons were not only physically strong, they also competed with words, their language channeled into the power of Thu'um. The language of the dragons, Dovazul, is not only a means of communication, but a force of fearsome power. The debates of dragons were deadly, their words concocting fire, ice, and all manner of deadly power. The Thu'um, whilst often being referred to as magic, is distinct from what is typically known as such. The magic cast by a mortal will typically use magicka, a resource that flows into the world through the sun and stars. The Thu'um, on the other hand, does not. When a dragon or mortal with sufficient talent or skill uses the Thu'um, they are adding to the universe, not changing it. They are not giving energy form through shaping it to their will, they are simply making their will manifest. A battle of the voice between dragons was a serious affair. The power of one's voice would determine their place in the hierarchy, and as such, the dragon seen to have the most powerful voice of them all would be seen as their leader. And so, of course, we come to Alduin, the World Eater. It was said that the dragons were once wild beasts until Alduin gave them structure. Alduin is often spoken of as the firstborn of Akatosh and leader of the dragon cult. The Nords view Alduin as the harbinger of the end, the eater of the world. But Alduin did not choose this path. The will to dominate was so enticing that Alduin abandoned his destiny, choosing instead to rule over the people of Atmora and later Tamriel as a tyrant. It is this very ambition that leads some to believe that Akatosh blessed the last Dragonborn with the sole intent of defeating Alduin, as we of course end up doing, in order to reclaim his soul so that he can be used to properly end the world when the time comes. After all, Alduin's soul is not absorbed by the last Dragonborn, as it is with every other dragon slain. And this event was not random. The seeds of prophecy were planted millennia ago, as we see on Alduin's wall. The Akaviri dragon slayers knew that one day Alduin would return and the last Dragonborn would rise to meet him. Dragonborn are rare beings, said to be granted the dragon blood by Akatosh himself, and brought into the world to be a hero for one group or another. We see this in legendary figures like Riemann Cyrodiil, Slave Queen Alicia, and Tiber's Septim. Aside from the blessing itself, it would seem the trait can be hereditary, as a steady line of Dragonborn emperors was needed in order to light the dragon fires that protected Nirn from the forces of Oblivion. Dragonborn not only have the ability to absorb the souls of dragons, as mentioned earlier, but also the ability to use the power and knowledge granted from those souls to grant instant understanding of the words of power of the Dovazul language. This results in them being able to use the Thu'um without the many years of study and practice it would take others, as we learn from the Greybeards, the practitioners of the Way of the Voice, as taught by Paarthurnax. Dragonborn have played a central role in the history of Tamriel. The Slave Queen Alicia was granted the power in order to wear the Amulet of Kings and light the dragon fires of the First Cyrodiilic Empire. Later, the Akaviri people would invade and swear fealty to Riemann Cyrodiil as their prophesied Dragonborn Emperor, and of course, Tiber's Septim would conquer all of Tamriel, creating the Septim Empire of the Third Era that almost all of the mainline games take place in. But before all of those, back in the Merethic era, there was the rule of the dragons. The Atmorans, who had later become the Nords of Skyrim, once worshipped animal totems. These totems represented their gods, but the most revered of them all was the dragon totem. As such, they revered the living dragons, and this was the basic foundation for the dragon cult. The dragons themselves, being above such things, didn't have any interest in any of the responsibility that comes with ruling. That they assigned to the dragon priests, the only beings considered worthy enough to so much as speak the name of their scaly overlords. These priests were given power by the dragons in exchange for their loyalty and ruled over the men of Atmora relatively peacefully. However, when the cult spread to Tamriel, these priests began to become far more cruel. The people of Skyrim became akin to slaves and were used and sacrificed as the priests saw fit. This would inevitably lead to rebellion. But among the ranks of the dragon priests, a traitor rose, the so-called First Dragonborn, Miraak. His story is one for another day, however, he turned multiple other priests to his side, and he claimed he had the ability to defeat Alduin, but chose not to when asked to help the rebellion, instead electing to serve his own interests before being whisked away to Apocrypha by Hermaeus Mora. As the servants of the cult began to rebel, it seemed as if victory were impossible. As soon as the dragons stopped receiving their tributes, they descended upon man with fury, slaughtering them by the thousands. However, all was not lost. There were dragons that decided to betray their loyalty to Alduin. These dragons would teach the ancient Nord heroes methods of slaying the dragons, turning the tide of the war. It is unknown as to why these dragons acted as they did. Some believe it was a direct intervention by Akatosh himself, but no matter the reason, it was instrumental in the victory of the rebellion. Chief among these betrayals was Alduin's brother and lieutenant, Paarthurnax. Paarthurnax taught the ancient Nord heroes the Thu'um, leading them to become the Tongues. These warriors would eventually go on to pour all of their anger, misery, pain, and determination into a new shout. A shout made up of words of power that the dragons simply could not comprehend, as they had no concept of mortality. This shout, combined with the already mighty voices of these heroes, led the rebellion to slaughter many dragons, and led to the final showdown with Alduin himself. At the throat of the world, they would use their new shout, named Dragonrend, to cripple Alduin. But as none of them were the prophesized hero destined to defeat him, they had to resort to one last desperate act. They used the power of an Elder Scroll, an artifact with unknowable power, to banish Alduin, with no knowledge of what may happen. But regardless of Alduin's fate, they had won. Alduin's death was the catalyst for the end of the dragon cult. Over the following few hundred years, it fractured and broke apart, leading to one last final stand in the First Era at Forholst in the Rift. During this time, they attempted to get hold of as many dragon corpses as possible, creating burial sites for them. Many would take the title of Dragon Slayer over the years, such as heroes like Jorg Helmborg, as we learned from the Akaviri records kept in Skyhaven Temple. But the most meticulous and successful were the Akaviri Dragon Guard. Not only were they responsible for the slaying of many dragons, but as previously mentioned, they also recorded all of their exploits and stories of those who slayed dragons before them. Their legacy would continue with the Blades, who would pridefully treasure the work of their predecessors. However, despite the slaughter that the Dragon Guard and others like them committed, not all dragons would be bested. A select few have been encountered through the ages, such as Nephalalagus, who helped the Red Guard hero Cyrus, and the dragons who swore fealty to Tiber Septim. Unfortunately, most of these dragons would be slain either by the end of the Tiber conquests or shortly after. But the sins of the past would re-emerge in the 201st year of the Fourth Era. Alduin, brought forward in time by the unpredictable power of the Elder Scroll, sought to resurrect his fellow dragons and usher in a new age of dragon dominance. Whilst all the characters in-game act as if Alduin is there to eat the world and fulfill his duty, there is no evidence he has decided to do so. He didn't during the Merethic era after all. Alduin has the sole ability to revive the dragons in full. This ability works due to the nature of the souls of dragons. They are immortal. This process can only be prevented if another dragon or Dragonborn defeats the dragon and absorbs their soul. There are supposedly magics capable of severing the link between a dragon's physical form and its soul, though it is not known what happens to the soul once this act has been completed. Another ability Alduin guards is the power to travel to Sovngarde, the afterlife of the Nords, and devour the souls of the dead, increasing his power. But with the emergence of Alduin comes the emergence of the last Dragonborn, and so the prophecy is yours to complete or not. Sure, you could stop the world from being enslaved and or destroyed, but who has the time? There's Daedric artifacts to collect, factions to join, wars to be won, books to read, and mead to be drunk. Who needs prophecy when you have a province to explore? If you'd like to hear more about the stories of each individual dragon found in Skyrim, I have a separate video about all of that I'll link in the description or on the screen or something. Thank you all very much for watching. I wasn't expecting this video to be quite this long, but here we are. Remember to subscribe if you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time.